Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 2 NFL predictions. And last week, in Week 1, I had a record of 12-4. But kicking things off this week on Thursday Night Football, we have the Commanders at the Packers. And I think this is going to be a great game. Both these teams got off to great starts in Week 1, as the Packers beat the Lions pretty easily, and the Commanders dominated the Giants. And this is also a good early season test for both teams, and we can see just how good each team is. But offensively for the Packers, they looked really good last week, putting up 27 points, and they were great in the first half. Although they faced the Commanders' defense that gave up just 6 points last week, although they were facing the Giants. Now on the flip side, we've got a really interesting matchup, because obviously the Commanders' offense is great, but the Packers' defense looked really good last week, holding the Lions just 13 points. And Micah Parsons also looked good in his Packers debut, and I think he's going to have a huge game this week as he's matched up against rookie right tackle Josh Connerly. But this is a tough game to predict, but I'm going to take the Packers to get the win. They're at home. They looked really good last week. I think their defense continues to play well, and I've got the Packers by a score of 24-20. Moving to the games on Sunday, beginning with the Jaguars at the Bengals. So this is an interesting game. Both teams won in Week 1 as the Jaguars beat the Panthers and the Bengals beat the Browns. Although the Bengals offense didn't look that good, but that's nothing too unusual for them in Week 1. But I do expect Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense to be a lot better this week because the Jaguars defense isn't anything too crazy. Now on the opposite side, the Jaguars offense was very good last week, putting up 26 points and rushing for 200 yards. And I could see that continuing because the Bengals defense isn't very good, although the Bengals actually did a great job stopping the run last week. But this is a game that I could see going either way, but I'm going to take the Bengals. I think this is a higher scoring game that definitely favors the Bengals because their offense is a lot better. And I've also got the Bengals because they're at home. I got the Bengals by a score of 31-24. Next game, we have the Giants at the Cowboys. So both these teams are looking for their first win of the season, after the Cowboys lost to the Eagles and the Giants were dominated by the Commanders. Now, the Giants' offense was terrible last week, not scoring a single touchdown, and their offensive line was awful. Now, I do think the Giants' offense will be a little bit better this week, especially because the Cowboys' defense isn't anything too good, especially up front, but I still don't think this Giants' offense is anything too good. Now, the Cowboys offense, they had a pretty good game last week. They put up 20 points all in the first half, and they did so against a pretty good Eagles defense. And Dak Prescott played pretty well. And I think this could be another good game for Dak Prescott and the Cowboys offense, because the Giants defense didn't play that well last week. But this is a game that I could see going either way. I definitely think this is going to be a lot closer game than last week's game for the Giants, but I'm going to take the Cowboys. They're the better overall team, they're at home, and I've got the Cowboys 24-16. Up next, we got the Bears at the Lions. So both these teams are looking to bounce back after a rough loss in Week 1, as the Bears they blew a lead against the Vikings, and the Lions were destroyed by the Packers. And in this game, we also get to see Ben Johnson face the Lions for the first time. But I think this game should be pretty good. Offensively for the Lions, they really struggled last week, and they need to be a lot better. But they faced a Bears defense that looked great up until the fourth quarter, where they completely fell apart. Then on the offensive side of things for the Bears, they were okay last week. Nothing great, but they weren't awful either. And they faced the Lions defense that struggled last week, allowing 27 points. But this is a tough game to predict. I would pick the Bears because they did look like the better team last week, but I'm going to take the Lions. They're at home, and I think they're going to bounce back win. Plus, the Lions haven't lost back-to-back games since 2022. But I've got the Lions winning a pretty close game, 24-19. Up next, we have the Rams at the Titans. So the Rams, they're coming off a low-scoring win over the Texans, and the Titans, they lost to the Broncos 20-12. Now, for the Titans, quarterback Cam Ward showed a lot of potential, and his numbers weren't great last week, but he still played really well and made some great throws in his first start. Plus, he was doing it against one of the best defenses in the NFL. So I'm definitely interested to see how Cam Ward looks against a defense that's still good, but not one of the best in the league. But the Rams' defense is good. They didn't allow a touchdown last week, and their front seven is elite, although they can be beaten on the back end. Then on the flip side, the Rams' offense wasn't anything too impressive last week, just 14 points, but they were playing against a great Texans defense, although the Titans' defense isn't that bad. But this is a game where I could see an upset. I think Cam Ward is going to have a pretty good game, and I could see him leading the Titans to the win. But I'm going to take the Rams to get the win. I think their pass rush should keep Cam Ward under constant pressure, and I'm going to go with the more experienced quarterback in Matthew Stafford, who's also got more weapons around him. So I've got the Rams by a score of 20-16. Up next, we got the Patriots at the Dolphins. So the Dolphins, they looked awful last week, losing to the Colts 33-8, and they were terrible on both sides of the ball. Now, the Patriots also lost as they lost to the Raiders, and their offense didn't play that well, putting up just 13 points, but Drake May did have a good game, throwing for 287 yards. And I definitely think May could have another big game, as he now faces a Dolphins secondary that was just torched through the air by Daniel Jones. Now, on the flip side, the Dolphins' offense was brutal last week, and Tua really struggled, turning the ball over 3 times, although the Patriots' defense did allow 362 yards through the air. So maybe that can get the Dolphins' offense going. But I think the Dolphins have the advantage here on paper as just the more talented team, plus they're at home, but after what we saw last week, I really don't trust them, and I'm going to take the Patriots to get the win. I think Drake May has another good game, I think the Patriots' defense plays well enough, and I've got the Patriots beating the Dolphins by a score of 24-14. Up next, we got the 49ers at the Saints. So this is a game that shouldn't be that close, but the 49ers, they're already in midseason form with the amount of injuries they have. As Brock Purdy's unlikely to play, George Kittle is already out with a hamstring injury, and Juwan Jennings is battling a shoulder injury. Plus, there's more I haven't named. But with Brock Purdy being out, Mac Jones is going to get the start at quarterback for the 49ers, and he faced the Saints defense that wasn't terrible last week, allowing 20 points. Although, they did struggle to stop the run, allowing 146 on the ground, so I think that could lead to a big game for Christian McCaffrey. Now, the Saints offense is going to be starting Spencer Rattler at quarterback once again, and he wasn't very good last week, and he now has to face a 49ers defense that was great last week, allowing just 13 points. But I could see the Saints with the upset win here, especially because they're at home and facing a banged up 49ers team. But I do have the 49ers getting the win here. I think their defense controls this game. I think they run the ball effectively, and I've got the 49ers 21-13. Up next, we have the Bills at the Jets. So the Bills, they're coming off a huge comeback win over the Ravens, and the Jets, they lost to the Steelers, although their offense looked pretty good. But last week, the Jets offense put up 32 points, and they did so against a good Steelers defense. And Justin Fields also had a good Jets debut, with 3 total touchdowns, and he was also good as a passer, averaging 9.9 yards per pass attempt, which was 3rd best in week 1. And I definitely think there's a possibility the Jets offense continues to play well, because the Bills defense wasn't that good last week, allowing 40 points. Although I definitely think there is a big difference between the Ravens offense and the Jets offense. Now, on the other side, the Bills offense, they were great. They scored 41 points, and Josh Allen was insane. And this is going to be a very tough game for this Jets defense. But I think this is a game that could actually be pretty good. Both these teams were great offensively last week and not great defensively. I do think that'll balance out a little bit, but I still think this could be on the higher scoring side. But I'm going to take the Bills to get the win with a better offense, better overall team. I've got Josh Allen outplaying Justin Fields, and the Bills win 31-22. Up next, we have the Seahawks at the Steelers. So this is another game that's pretty interesting. For the Seahawks, they lost the 49ers last week 17-13, and the Steelers beat the Jets in a shootout where Aaron Rodgers threw 4 touchdowns. Now, Rodgers and the Steelers offense was great last week, although I don't think they're going to be quite as good this week because the Seahawks defense is pretty good. Now, on the other side, the Seahawks offense was not good last week, with just 13 points, and they need to be a lot better. But this is a tough game to predict. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game because both teams are pretty good defensively. So I'm going to take the Steelers to get the win. Their offense looked great last week, and they're also at home, and I'm going to take the Steelers by a score of 21-16. Up next, we have the Browns at the Ravens. So the Ravens, they're coming off a disappointing loss to the Bills, blowing a huge lead, and the Browns, they lost to the Bengals, although they had an opportunity to win that game. But the Ravens, they need to be better. Their offense was great last week with 40 points, and I think they could have another big game offensively against the Browns defense that is okay. Then on the other side, the Browns offense was okay last week, and Joe Flacco threw for nearly 300 yards, although he also had 2 interceptions. But the Browns, they faced the Ravens defense that was terrible last week against the pass, allowing almost 400 yards through the air. But I'm going to take the Ravens to get the win here. The Browns, they have given the Ravens some trouble in the past years, but I'm going to take the Ravens to get the win here after a bad loss. I think they bounce back, and they easily beat the Browns 34-13. Up next, we have the Broncos at the Colts. So this is a pretty interesting matchup. The Broncos, they weren't too impressive in their Week 1 win over the Titans, and the Colts, they looked great as they destroyed the Dolphins. And a big reason the Colts were so good last week is Daniel Jones had 3 total touchdowns in his Colts debut. But this is a big week for the Colts offense, because we get to see if they're actually good, or if they were just playing against a terrible defense last week. But the Colts offense, they face what I think is the best defense in the NFL in the Broncos. As the Broncos, they were great last week and didn't even allow a touchdown. Now, on the other side, the Broncos offense wasn't that good last week, and Bo Nix got off to a rough start, but I still think this Broncos offense is pretty good. But they face a Colts defense that held the Dolphins to just 211 yards last week. But this is an interesting game. We're going to learn a lot about the Colts in this game and just how good they actually are. But I'm going to take the Broncos to get the win. I think their defense controls this game. They contain the Colts offense, and I think the Broncos offense will be a little bit better than they were last week. And I've got the Broncos with the win by a score of 23-17. Although this is a game that can definitely go their way. Up next, we have the Panthers at the Cardinals. So the Cardinals are 1-0 after they beat the Saints last week, and the Panthers, they lost to the Jaguars in a tough game, especially offensively. Bryce Young was not good last week, completing under half his passes, and he also had 2 interceptions, as the Panthers offense scored just 10 points. Then a match up against a Cardinals defense that played pretty well last week. And then offensively for the Cardinals, they also weren't amazing, but they were pretty solid last week, putting up 20 points. And they have a good matchup against a bad Panthers defense. But I have the Cardinals with the win here. I think this is a pretty bad matchup for the Panthers. I've got the Cardinals moving to 2-0 in the season and beating the Panthers by a score of 24-18. Moving on, we have the Eagles at the Chiefs. So this is a big game as we have a Super Bowl rematch here in week 2. But the Eagles, they were okay last week in their win over the Cowboys, and the Chiefs didn't look too good as they lost to the Chargers in Brazil. And the Chiefs are looking to avoid their first 0-2 start since 2014. But the Chiefs' offense was decent last week, but nothing too impressive, and they match up against an Eagles defense that didn't play that well against the Cowboys last week, especially against the pass. So I can definitely see Patrick Mahomes having a big game and really getting this Chiefs offense going. Now, on the flip side, the Eagles' offense was solid last week, and they ran the ball really well. And the Chiefs' defense was actually really good against the run, allowing just 90 rushing yards, although they were terrible against the pass, allowing 304 yards through the air. But this is a game that can definitely go their way. Obviously, the Super Bowl was not close, and the Eagles won that game easily. But I actually think this game is going to be really good and a really close game. And I have no idea who to pick here, but I'm going to go with the Chiefs. I think they're going to be able to avoid the 0-2 start. They're back at home. And I think their offense gets going against the defense that wasn't too impressive last week. And I think the Chiefs' defense is able to contain the Eagles' run game and force Jalen Hurts to throw the ball. And they're going to force Jalen Hurts to beat him. I don't think he will. But I've got the Chiefs in a close game, 27-23, but this game can definitely go their way. Moving on to Sunday Night Football, we have the Falcons at the Vikings. And we'll have a live watch party for this game that will start at about 8:15 Eastern Time on Sunday, so I hope to see you guys there. But this is a really interesting game, as these are 2 good teams with 2 second-year quarterbacks. But offensively for the Falcons, they looked pretty good last week, and Michael Penix Jr. had a great game, with just about 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I'm all in on Michael Penix Jr. Although I do think this could be a tough test for Penix in the offense, because they face a Vikings defense that is quite good. Then on the flip side, the Vikings offense was terrible for the first 3 quarters last week, before they were great in the 4th quarter, and J.J. McCarthy had 3 total touchdowns. Now, I am interested to see if the Vikings offense can continue to carry that over into this week's game. But McCarthy and the Vikings offense, they face the Falcons defense that isn't the greatest, but also isn't terrible. But this is a game that is very tough to predict. But I'm going to take the Vikings to get the win. They are at home. I think their defense is slightly better. And I've got them with the win by a score of 24-21. But another game that can definitely go their way. Moving to the 2 games we actually have on Monday night, starting off with the Buccaneers at the Texans. And we'll have a live watch party for this game that will start at about 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, so I hope to see you guys there. But for the Buccaneers, they're coming off a win over the Falcons, and the Texans, they lost to the Rams 14-9. The Texans' offense last week was not good, not scoring a single touchdown, and the offensive line continued to be a big problem, allowing 3 sacks. Now, the Texans, they face the Buccaneers' defense that is good, although not quite as good as the Rams' defense they saw last week. Then on the flip side, we have a matchup that is pretty interesting. We've got a great Buccaneers offense against a great Texans defense, and I think that is going to be a really fun matchup to watch. But this is another game that can definitely go either way, but I've got the Buccaneers with the win here. I think they're the better overall team, and I think their offense does enough against a tough defense, and I've got the Buccaneers by a score of 24-16. And our final game, also on Monday night, we've got the Chargers at the Raiders. So this is another interesting game. Both these teams look fairly good in week 1, and both teams are 1-0. The Chargers, they were great in their win over the Chiefs, and their pass game looked really good, with Justin Herbert throwing for over 300 yards. And I think Herbert's going to have another big game this week, as the Raiders' pass defense isn't that good, and they gave up 276 yards last week. Then on the flip side, the Raiders also threw the ball well in week 1, as Geno Smith had 362 passing yards. But while the passing game was great, the run game wasn't too good. So I would like to see if the Raiders can get Ashton Jeanty going. Although it might be another tough game for the Raiders on the ground because the Chargers defense is very good. But this is another tough game to predict, and another one that can definitely go either way. But I'm going to take the Chargers to get the win. I think Justin Herbert has another big game, the Chargers offense has another big game, and I think their defense is a lot better than the Raiders defense. And I've got the Chargers with the win in a fairly close game, 30-21. But those are my Week 2 NFL predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. Be sure to check out the community tab of my channel, where you guys can vote on who you think wins some of this week's big games. But that's all for this video. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.